All right, let's go into our ordinances. We have two of them this morning. I think we're back in operation here, folks. So the first ordinance is Ordinance 341, and I'm going to ask our General Counsel, Ms. Shelley Devine, to read the ordinance by title only.
Thank you, Mr. Board President. Ordinance number 341 of the Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon, amending Chapter 14 of the Trimet Code to revise the definition of net earnings from self-employment. This is the second reading.
Thank you very much. Mr. General Manager, have any comments? This is a kind of standard bookkeeping ordinance we have to do every so often.
Every year, we need to reconnect our own payroll tax code, if you will, to be in line with the Internal Revenue Service changes, whatever they might be. So that's the purpose of this ordinance.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there any questions on this ordinance? We did have a public hearing, which nobody appeared, and discussed this at our last meeting, which we like sometimes. So unless there's other questions, I'm going to ask Ms. Devine to do a roll call vote for this. Do we need to make a motion? We need to make a motion, don't we, to approve Ordinance 341. So is there a motion to approve Ordinance 341?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and I have a second. Thank you. Any further questions? All right, now, Ms. Devine, if you do the roll call vote on this motion, please.
All right. Director Esmond.
Aye.
Director Martin. Aye. Director Bethel.
Aye.
Director Warner.
Aye.
Director Stovall.
Aye.
Director Bauman.
Aye.
Director Prosser.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. So this ordinance has been approved. Thank you very much. Let's move on to Ordinance 342, and we do have about 4 people who've signed up to comment on this ordinance. This is our first reading of this ordinance, and I'm going to again turn to Trimet General Counsel Shelley Devine for the first reading of this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Board President. Ordinance number 342 of the Tri-County Metropolitan Transportation District of Oregon, adopting an electronic fare program and proof of fare payment provisions, and amending Trimet Code Chapters 19 and 29. And as you noted, this is the first reading.
Thank you. Mr. General Manager, do you have some comments, and maybe some staff would like to give us a little more information on this one?
Exactly, Mr. Board, members of the board. At our briefing just 2 weeks ago, we presented you with a very, I think, comprehensive look at the HOP FastPass system and the policies that are proposed to be embedded in Trimet Code with this ordinance. I'll ask our dynamic trio of Chris Tucker, Jake War, and Tom Strader to come up and actually give a very short presentation, a review of the materials that you saw, and I think in some greater detail 2 weeks ago. But again, the notion that we have had in blending and designing the e-fare system have really been with the issues of equity at the forefront. So the ultimate policies you have are a blending and a balancing in our regard, equity issues, the business needs, and the overall impacts to our customers, who we know will be asking to use the system in a different way moving ahead. So with that, I would like to turn it over to staff to give a very short presentation and a review of the materials that you saw previously.
Great.
Thank you, Neil. President Warner, members of the board, good morning. Again, I'm Chris Tucker, Director of Revenue Operations and Finance, and I have Tom Strader here, who's a Senior Fare Policy Coordinator in Public Affairs, and Jake War, who is in Transit Equity and Diversity. He's an analyst in that department. Today we will briefly cover why we're doing e-fare, how the system works, the features, Title VI analysis, community feedback, mitigations, and recommendations. It'll really just be a recap of what we covered a few weeks ago. The key reasons haven't changed for why we are looking at e-fare, which kicked off in 2012. A few of them are that it is simple for operators and customers to understand and use. It is regional between C-Tran, Streetcar, and Trimet. It would increase pricing equity and easy to maintain equipment. While customers can still pay as they go with cash on the bus or at a ticket vending machine at rail stations, we're adding many new ways to pay. Most notably, customers can pick up a telephone and pay over the phone. They'll be able to use a new website and a new mobile app. and of course the several hundred retail stores we've mentioned. What I think is noteworthy with that, the retail store, is that a customer with no access to internet, no bank account, no smartphone, and no registration required can go into a retail store, grab a card, and add cash to it and start riding transit immediately. And that's really one of the more powerful designs of this system. We're also looking at this new app that would allow customers to tap their app, their phone, to use the hop card in the back end, so it'd be a virtual card. And for visitors or occasional riders, they'd be able to use a contactless bank card or a smartphone using what's called Apple Pay or Samsung Pay or Android Pay. There are also many new features for riders, such as the ability to buy a monthly pass 1 day at a time, and any unused balance on the account rolls over to the next month. We've heard extensive support for those features. It also includes lost card protection, and we'll have a different website for institutions, so schools, employers, social service agencies, where they can load passes onto a card for their various clients or students or employees. I'll pause for just a second, see if there's any questions thus far. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who can cover the fare ordinance changes.
One question, it has to do with the rollover. Is there going to be any maximum cap on how much one can roll over? Say, for instance, I have $100 left, which is highly unusual, just using a figure, let's say $25. And then I buy through the next month and I have $20 left over. Then I buy, but then I don't use, and now I'm up to $40. It will continue to roll each month as long as I have a balance there and there's no capping, nothing that throws it out.
That's correct. The only cap is you can only load a total of $250 per card. So you wouldn't be able to load more than that at any one time. And if you don't use it, all $250 will roll over.
Okay, thank you.
So one question about the terminology we utilize when we talk about rollover. I mean, isn't it just that the funds don't expire?
Sure.
I mean, because when I think about rollover, I think about something that actually does have an expiration, and so you think, okay, it's going to roll over, it's going to accumulate, but frankly, it doesn't expire.
Yeah, I think that the only caveat I would say is that under current legislation, if you don't use your balance for a period of 3 years, then it would be escheated to the state. So under current legislation, technically there's an expiration if you never use it. Yeah, so the rollover is maybe a little more clear on how it's going to work from month to month.
But if you didn't use it, then essentially at the end of that 3-year period, it wouldn't roll over.
True. Yeah, then it gets just escheated to the state, so it gets sent to the state. Yes.
Okay.
We're working on the legislation on that.
I
so
remember.
if that passes, then of course it's a different set of rules we'll follow.
All right.
Please proceed.
Okay, great. Good morning, members of the board. The proposed ordinance that comes to you today for first reading is really focused specifically on those items that are necessary for e-fare and to keep us on track for system development. We are not proposing to eliminate a fare or change a price at this time. However, there are still some provisions that require your approval, and these are described in the memo for Ordinance 342, but briefly, the ordinance would establish stored value and fare capping at the values you see here in the first bullet for 2.5-hour tickets, 1-day passes, and 1-month passes or caps. The key thing to keep in mind here is that the pricing maintains alignment with what we currently offer. There's no changes there. We would maintain cash fares and 2.5-hour paper transfers. The card fee for new cards would be set at $3, and the minimum load would be set at $5, except for the Trimet ticket office, where we would propose there would be no minimum load requirement. Adult 2.5-hour tickets and 1-day passes would be available with other financial instruments like contactless bank cards, Apple Pay, Android Pay, and lift fares consistent with what's currently offered. A 1-month pass or cap would be available for $74, a single for $250, and there would be no day pass for Lyft just as there is not today. And then there are a couple of housekeeping items that are more or less housekeeping items. The ordinance would update language to allow for the implementation of contactless media for group pass programs that right now address primarily visually identifiable small stickers that are put on employer badges. And it would update fair enforcement provisions to allow for the inspection using smartphone devices. So again, while these are items that are required for system development, they're really essentially additions and updates to the fare code. And while this ordinance does not propose to eliminate any fares at this time, we'd anticipate perhaps future ordinances that would facilitate the transition away from many of our current paper tickets and passes that we offer today. And I'll stop there.
A question, if I might. Would you go back? You mentioned the card fee of $3 and minimum load of $5. You said something about accepted Trimet offices. I want to be clear that I'm hearing what you're saying.
Yes. So right now, if you were to go to a retail outlet, one of the 500 plus retail outlets not operated by Trimet, the minimum load would be $5, similar to what it is with the current mobile ticketing app right now. If you were to go to the Trimet ticket office, there would not be a minimum load requirement, so you could load $2.50.
Okay, that's good. I never heard it explained that way, because one of the questions has been, in terms of dealing with low-income riders, that having that $5 minimum on a card is, really out of their range. But this makes it, though the person will have to now go to one of the Trimet offices, but it does now eliminate that minimum that they can just load a $2.50 and travel. And I would hope that that would be one that would be explained and, I don't use the word pushed out there, but, advertise a little bit more. I think it will help down that concern some about, a family with 4 or 5, and if I've got 4 in the family, that means I got to have $20 sitting to even go down and load their cards. But if I go by the Trimet office now, I can load whatever amount, and I don't have to pay that five. I don't have to be bounded by that $5 minimum. I just want to be clear. I was hearing that. Thank you.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Jake, and he'll cover more background on the e-fare process.
Good morning, President Warner and members of the board. So just a brief recap of what we talked about a couple weeks ago on the Title VI analysis process surrounding the policy changes related to e-fare. So we conducted this process by first doing a peer review of similar changes at other agencies. Using that, as well as our own policies, developed a methodology to analyze the changes. We produced a preliminary report that was really quantitative based on the data, and that informed our really small targeted outreach effort with CBOs, community-based organizations, where we conducted discussion groups to get some feedback on the policies and really go in depth on potential impacts and to really educate those small groups on what e-fare would mean, how it might impact the way they ride. Throughout this process, we engaged with the Transit Equity Advisory Committee from the beginning to end to get feedback on policies and procedures as we went through it. And all that led to the production of an equity analysis report that you have and are required to consider, be aware of, and approve as part of this fare ordinance change. So in terms of the actual meat of the analysis, with using the data that we analyzed, using survey data, we did, for the most part, did not find disparate impact on minority populations or disproportionate burdens on low-income populations. I'll highlight a couple of the areas where this is particularly important. One is in the proposed retail network. The access to that retail network was actually comparatively better for minority and low-income populations than others. That doesn't mean that everybody has perfect access to it, but it's just better comparing those populations. The fare caps are actually a potentially greater benefit for minority and low-income populations because of the amount that they ride. People who ride more are more likely to benefit from fare caps. And the $3 card cost, we didn't find any Title VI concerns with that so long as cash transfers are maintained so that riders have another option if they can't afford that $3 card cost and they choose not to participate in the HOP system. So now in terms of where we found a few potential issues that we needed to highlight for you, two of them were related to access to features that require a bank account, the automatic reload and accepting of contactless bank cards. Those, because low income and minority populations are less likely to have bank accounts, are less likely to be utilized. But we didn't hear a whole lot of concerns about that in our outreach. And as Chris said earlier, those are kind of more targeted to infrequent users anyway and visitors, et cetera. And then the $5 minimum load requirement, which we've been discussing, we did find that that had a potentially greater impact on both minority and low-income populations. So Chris is going to talk a little bit more about our community conversations about that and how we intend to and propose to address some of these issues. But I'll take any questions on that piece if you have any.
See then.
Okay. Here's a summary of the focal points we discussed with the community. As you'll recall, we addressed each of these in a bit of depth at the January briefing. I'm just going to summarize. What we heard was that the $3 card fee was a barrier for families. We heard some concern about the $5 reload minimum, but it wasn't a focal point of the feedback. There were minimal concerns about reloading at TVMs, but it was desirable. And there were no concerns with eliminating paper tickets and passes. There were key support for fare capping, the stored value, the retail network stores and locations, the lost card protection, free cards initially, the anonymous registration, and maintaining cash transfers. This is just a quick shot at the current retail map. The purple and green indicate essentially retail deserts where we have transit stops, but there's no retail stores within a mile. Once we roll out electronic fare, the first 500 stores, the map looks like this, so it gets significantly better. And of course, we want to continue to work on adding more stores to close the gaps. As far as recommended mitigations, and this is really the last slide, is that the community did provide very positive feedback about the design of eFare, but it was also very useful in identifying some additional mitigations that we want to consider. We were able to set the system up so folks can register without providing an email address or have internet access, and it was really clear to us the importance of free cards, especially initially. As we've learned feedback throughout the project, even from the beginning of the project and we were doing market research, we implemented early mitigations such as fare capping, retaining cash transfers, and expanding the retail network. With all of that, we believe several additional mitigations are worth consideration based on the community feedback. And those are 200,000 free cards initially, free cards via Access Transit Partners, maintaining cash transfers for the foreseeable future, no minimum purchase at the Trimet ticket office, and continuing to expand and target additional retail stores. And there's a few where the business case doesn't support the significant financial investment, such as reloading at ticket vending machines or lowering the minimum load at retail stores, as well as a family fare due to the complexity of rolling that out at retail stores and throughout the system. So we certainly are proposing these mitigations, and we certainly can reassess these at post-launch, but wanted to stop there, and that concludes our presentation.
Director Prosser, please.
Actually, I have two questions. We've engaged in an initial public outreach, which has given you the feedback here. We've indicated that we want to continue with that effort. So my question is, what ability will there be to adjust any of these issues as we move forward towards implementation based on that, any additional feedback that we may get with this continuing public outreach?
Are there a few key issues that you'd like me to respond to, or is it the ones we're recommending or not recommending?
This is more just, I guess in a way, procedural, because if we're going out with additional public outreach and we're going to be getting additional public feedback, it's theoretically possible that what we hear may suggest a change in some of the structure of what's in this ordinance. So, will we be able to accommodate that?
Yeah, I think I'll take the first crack at that. Generally speaking, there are many things that we can do throughout the life cycle of the project. So the system is highly configurable. There are things that there are levers we can pull to change, adjusting things up and down, adding different technology. So the few core system design, which would be very difficult to change, would be eliminating fare capping and eliminating stored value. And going just to straight pass products, because that really disassembles the retail network design entirely. So that one would be, those two I would say are very inflexible. As it relates to just adjusting levels, such as the reload amount or adding, reloading at ticket vending machines, for example, while those are costly endeavors, they're absolutely possible to do post-implementation. Okay. It would just be a program we'd put into place. We'd come back to you with consideration for authorization for change orders. But those things remain to be flexible in the future. So a few of them we're pretty much bound as we move forward. But if you were to come back and want to change many of the other considerations in the ordinance, those could be done.
Well, it also sounds like adding a family card. We at our study session we talked about the complexity of that. It sounds like that one would be one that really isn't likely to happen.
Well, it would be difficult operationally, but it's definitely not impossible. Mm-hmm. We would just need to weigh the pros and the cons of that implementation. How would we distribute the cards? How many different variations of a family card would we want to have out there? Is it for 4 kids or 6 kids, right, or just one card that's, you get what you take? I would say that one complexity would be if they wanted to have fare capping associated to a family card. It would be very, very, very difficult to do. But a concept of a different card that has a different product on it for a family, that is conceivably easy to achieve, but the distribution and the customer education would be a challenge. So we would just want to weigh the pros and the cons of that, but it's certainly something we could implement in the future.
As you go out for the additional outreach and you talk to folks wherever they are, I hope you're upfront about what things can be changed, which ones can't. I wouldn't want to raise expectations if, that we could do something that we really can't. Mm-hmm. So let's just be upfront, be honest about it. My second question, and this quite honestly just occurred to me, so I don't know if it's an issue or not, and this might be something, Shelley, for you. We go live on this project next year, and I can't remember when in the year, but it is 2017.
Yes.
We're considering this ordinance now because you need, obviously, to know what the rules are to know how to design the system. This ordinance takes effect 30 days after the second reading. So this will take effect basically March 24th. Are there things in this ordinance that will take effect March 24th, 2016, but it's for something that won't be put in place until sometime in 2017? Will there be problems in the interim with having something in the code that doesn't apply until this future date? And I'm, as I said, it just occurred to me, so I haven't gone through this. But I do notice one here that just kind of caught my eye on page 5 of 7. For each employer contract, Trimet will issue, and we're striking annual validation stickers and substituting universal pass fare instruments. We will be, I assume, issuing validation stickers 2016. Is it a problem that we're striking that now? I don't know. So if it's something, I wouldn't expect you to be able to answer off the top right now, but I think it might be something to look at.
Well, I can answer that.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Only because we have talked about this and considered
okay.
it before, not for any other reason, but we do have a good case law on the whole issue of can you make something effective on X date and yet you're not going to implement until sometime down the road. Trimet actually had that case in a different context, but we had it about 15, 20 years ago, go up to the Court of Appeals and concluded, yes, you can have an effective date.
Okay.
And implement down the road. And that is what we're talking about, is things that are going to be phased in over time. To Tom's point about we're going to come back to you when we're going to strike things, now that they're no longer being used at all or it's moot, we won't do that now. We'll take those out only when we've discontinued using those. So
Okay.
we'll be back again
Okay.
in another.
Thank you.
You bet.
Other questions? I guess I'd want to make clear, so the live date is next year. And I guess I always reserve the right to be smarter tomorrow. If we learn something, we can clearly make changes. We can do amendments to this ordinance to reflect the learning and again, input we get as we move forward in the implementation. I wouldn't expect anything less. Is that the way you guys see it also?
Yes.
All right, good, all right. Other questions from the board? All right, so to the board, you've seen what they've been doing in outreach and what we've been doing with the communities that might be affected. Last meeting, we had a pretty detailed discussion about the conclusions of the equity analysis associated with the policy changes. And our Transit Equity Advisory Committee has also reviewed the analysis, and I think we've had their comments and discussed those as part of the briefing too. So I guess, first off, I want to know, does the board have any other questions regarding transit equity analysis or any other concerns that we need to know about right now?
No.
Okay. Seeing none then. So it appears to me that the board's comfortable with the conclusions of equity analysis, and what I'd like to do now is move forward and open the floor for public comment on this session, or on this ordinance. And I will point out for the record, written comments already received online or through mail have been shared with the board, and any comment cards completed today will be forwarded to the board members and will become part of the formal record for the public hearing on this item. So with that, I'm going to ask folks to come up to speak based on the order of the sign up, and two at a time. I'd like to see if you can limit your comments to 3 minutes on this one also. Although there's only 4 people that have signed up. So I think you know the drill with the light up there and when it actually goes from green to yellow to red. And this is so we can have equal opportunity for people to make comments and maximize the time for everybody here. If you have additional information, obviously the record, we want to hear from you. So if you have other information, written or otherwise, please submit it. It'll be part of the record. So let me now open the public hearing then on Ordinance 342 and ask that Jason McCuff and Keith Schultz come up. That's fine with me. So Keith, and how about Orlando Lopez? Good morning, Keith.
Good morning. I'm Keith Schultz, and I'm a transit-dependent member of Opal and Bus Riders Unite. And I come here from Gresham to speak of some concerns I have about HOP, the new e-fare system you're beginning to implement. And some of these were kind of discussed in just a few minutes ago, and it was real nice. But please consider the position that a family of 4 would have, with a $3 cost per card, plus a $5 minimum load. A family of 4 would have to pay a total of $32 just to get started. Many of our transit-dependent families who are struggling to get by would find this hard to work with? And what about the next day or the days after that? Another concern I have, and I know you're working on this, is the retail network to reload cards. I've heard you're going to build it up to over 500 things. But last summer, I saw a partial map of Northeast Portland that showed a 35-block space between reloading stations. And that was on Northeast 82nd, one of the busiest bus lines. Please consider these thoughts and ensure that there are an adequate amount of locations to reload cards before you make your decision. And I'd also like to propose for you to explore a low-income fare. I know you've heard the family fare and everything. I think a low-income fare might help. Those who are struggling to get by would get a break. Many other transit agencies do have low-income fares. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Yes, good comments. Good morning.
Good morning, board members. My name is Orlando Lopez, and I'm a community organizer with Opal Environmental Justice. In the last meeting, you had a briefing on e-fare, and I come before you to express some of my concerns, especially how fast this e-fare program is moving forward. I appreciate the fact that Trimet reached out to the community, but reaching out to a little over 140 people is not enough. Trimet needs to do more outreach, whether it's through through more public forums or public comment before the board, such as today. I would recommend that Trimet reach out to social agencies, other community organizations, schools and universities for more input. The issues that have been brought up in these forums have not been addressed, such as a family card or exploring a low-income fare. This project needs more community input. The failure or low participation in this implementation of this program can be a disaster, such as ambitious programs before it, like Cover Oregon and the Columbia River Crossing, projects where millions were spent and nothing was accomplished. I would like to invite Trimet to work with us to develop solutions to the issues and concerns that the community has brought forth. At the very least, allow more time for public input beyond February 16th, like the February 24th Trimet board meeting, and continue your outreach efforts to the community. Family cards have been used in other agencies such as Utah, and I'm sure that we can implement it here. We have a great outstanding people working for Trimet that I'm sure can come up with something for a family. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your input. All right, so even more, and back to Jason McCuff.
Hi, good morning, board members that I know and board members that I don't know as well. My name is Avon Moore. I'm a member of Bus Riders Unite, like Keith. And I haven't written out a whole script, so this is going to be a little bit off the cuff. I'm personally looking forward to using the e-fare system. I think it sounds incredibly convenient for some of my purposes. And that's because I buy, a book of bus tickets at a time and shell them out, and you lose one book and you're in trouble. But I'm not really surprised, but I'm still feeling really disappointed by the whole process of outreach that's gone into making, this ordinance and the entire e-fare program. There were no organized efforts to contact specifically minorities and low-income people until after hardware was already being installed and after software contracts had already been signed, to the point where one of the most strong concerns at these small community forums that happened in November and December was that it would be difficult for families with, a number of children to use. The family card was expressed, from what I can tell, at more than one of these forums, right? And the family card is one of the policies that we've just been told would be very, very difficult to implement according to the system that's already been put in place and would be extremely difficult to change. Obviously, it sounds like TriMet is working on finding some way of making that work. And what I'm hoping is that it doesn't turn into a, well, we've heard your concern, we put together a little task force, and we found that it just wasn't workable. What I'm hoping is that TriMet will aggressively pursue the mitigation efforts that have been suggested for some of the issues that have been brought up. For example, finding a way to make a family card happen in whatever way it takes. Also, for example, just aggressively expanding the retail network. You've been talking about having an expanded retail network for a long time, but I start off with concerns about the methodology that was used to develop the map of the retail network in the first place, taking into account only the location of the retail network and not its proximity to bus stops. If you imagine someone having to walk from their home, to the retail network and then to the bus stop to buy their ticket, it was problematic. And things like it's been suggested that Plaid Pantry might get on board. It's really important to make sure that actually happens, and it's not just a good idea that becomes impracticable. My last concern that I want to air is the mitigation. Mitigation of the, let me check and see my notes. Okay, so the $3 card cost is with cash transfers maintained. My concern is, TriMet is already planning to eliminate cash transfers. The timeline for that is 5 years. So if the mitigation for that cost is going to be something that you're already planning to phase out, what is the plan for 5 years from now? What kinds of suggestions are going to come up in the next few years as you're, asked to make further decisions that, again, can't be appropriately mitigated because you've already put this system in place? I think personally right now is a very good time to proactively take on a mitigation that would ease the transition to this system, that would also address some of the widespread problems that we're facing with affordability of not just transportation, but also housing and other cost of living issues in Portland, and that is the institution of a low-income fare. That's something that we can incorporate into this e-fare program as we're making other fare changes and as we're designing, what these various cards are going to come out as in stores. And there really is no better time than now to do it. Thank you.
I hear a lot of the issues that she brings up and other people have brought up. And overall, I see a lot of things out there that government does that are really in a mediocre way. And there's a lot of solutions that I see that government can do things better. For example, regarding the family fares, I think the real solution there is to simply say that to allow older children to ride free on weekends with their parents when there is plenty of capacity. And also really look to expanding the youth pass programs by funding that by getting some access to the state pupil transportation funding that right now is arbitrarily restricted to yellow school buses. A district can't say, hey, I want to partner with a transit company and have them take my students to school and also take the seniors to the lunch site or whatever. Also, I'd like to say that this is not really a good time for a rider-oriented hearing, and that there really needs to be a riders advisory panel who could hold a riders-oriented public hearing and also provide suggestions and feedback to you. And I think that's really missing. You may cover the business aspect of the organization, but there is also a service aspect. The only thing really public hearing that I know of before this was a Transit on Tap event, which while it was nice, it was sold out. It was overfull. And I also like to remind everybody that TriMet tried a advanced fare system in the 1980s, a self-service fare collection, and it was a failure. The equipment broke down, the process broke down, and also with the Globe Sherpa app, a lot of people have issues with it. It's a great idea, and I want to thank you for being innovative and doing it, but it's buggy, it's slow, And also, one thing you really need to aim for is being able to reload these cards at any business that wants to, any corner store, any restaurant. Because all a business needs to do is, number one, do a payment transaction. Number two, get on the Fair Payment website and mark fares as added to the rider's account. And number three, in turn pay Trimet minus a commission. This is not like Orca or other cards where it's proprietary and you'd have to have this big giant ticket machine at a corner store to load your card. Also, I think it is kind of an affront that Plaid Pantry is not going to be a reload point, while 7-Elevens are. And a mile is really way too far to walk, to just be able to get on the bus, to be able to pay to get on the bus. And overall, I think we need to, I'll wrap it up by saying, I think we need to really push for eliminating cash fares. They are an invitation to fare disputes, to fare evasion, and it's a really stressful thing for the operator to have to sell fares, the conflict there. And lastly, distance-based fares. I really would like to wish we would have implemented backdoor readers on the buses so you could have distance-based fares. Electronic fares would be a simple way to implement those because you'd have to tap off. And bottom line is, should not take the same amount of fare to get from Hillsborough way to Gresham as it is just go down the street, say a mile to the grocery store or whatever. And really, the ability to use your phone or use any other bank card needs to be available at the start. The cards should really be a backup system. We should really try to conforming the user interface to the user, if you will, and making it so they are, if at all possible, using the existing cards they already have. If you have an employer pass or a college pass, you should be able to simply add that onto your account and add that onto your phone, which would be registered to your account, and use your phone as your fare, even if you have, that kind of passes. And I think I'll end it there.
All right, Jason.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you very much. Very, very thoughtful comments.
Well, you're welcome.
That's all I have who signed up today to provide testimony on this ordinance. Is there anybody else in the audience that did not sign up and wishes to speak this morning? Jared.
Morning, board members. My name's Jared Franz. I am now at the Amalgamated Transit Union, 757. So you're going to have to deal with me in that context now.
Interesting, okay.
I wasn't planning on speaking today, actually, but the reason that I'm up here is that we're hearing a lot about shortcomings in the process for e-fare. And we know that no process is perfect, and we know that we're all committed to improving it. But it's worth pointing out that two groups are going to be most impacted by the coming e-fare system. The riders, obviously, and we've talked a lot about that, but operators as well. They're going to be dealing with the e-fare system every day. And to this day, Trimet operators have not been talked to about e-fare. They haven't received briefings or trainings on what this is going to look like, or how it's going to be enforced, or how it's going to change their workplace environment. I'm not here to get angry or cause problems about that. I'm here to simply point it out, that we're leaving an entire group of most impacted people out of this conversation, and that's the people who are actually going to implement and use and enforce this fare system. And I would encourage Trimet to begin those dialogues with ATU members, other operators, as soon as possible, so that we can make sure that the actual implementation of e-fare is as smooth as possible. The second thing that I wanted to do is just follow up a little bit on a point that Avon raised, and that's the methodology that's being used around the retail networks. I appreciate Board Member Bethel's pointing out the importance of having options where you can load less than the $5 minimum. It is a step in the right direction for Trimet to make that available at the ticket office downtown. Unfortunately, you have to get downtown to use that option. But what we have heard is Trimet exploring options of providing software and other resources to nonprofit organizations, social services, schools, and even employers, so that these organizations can provide e-fare services to the people who use their services or attend their schools. And we would suggest eliminating the minimum purchase for those outlets as well. We can understand maintaining a minimum purchase at the retail outlets. In fact, it's probably already in the contracts that are being signed. But as we're reaching out to our other partners, exploring more flexibility is important. As far as retail network distribution is concerned, there are some serious concerns about how that was calculated. I'll give you the best example, and this is from North Portland. Killingsworth and Prescott are about a half mile apart. The number 72, which is one of the most critical bus lines in the system, particularly for communities of color and low income, runs along Killingsworth. There is no e-fare retail outlet on Killingsworth between Cesar Chavez and 82nd, which is quite a stretch for the 72. There are, however, retail outlets down on Prescott, about a half mile away. The methodology that Trimet has used to calculate access to retail outlets would tell you that the 72 is well served by retail outlets. But what's going to happen is that people who live along Killingsworth will have to walk a half mile south to Prescott to purchase their e-fare, and then a half mile back to Killingsworth to catch the bus that they actually need to take. I think more attention needs to be paid to how we're calculating retail deserts, I guess is the phrase we've all coined now, and really double down on efforts to expand not just more retail networks as part of our outlets, but also more libraries, social service agencies, and nonprofits that can participate in this program without minimum loads. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your new gig, I guess. All right. Anyone else? All right. With that, I'm going to close the public hearing. Mr. General Manager, do you have any comments based on what you've heard?
We'll certainly respond to the comments and concerns that you've heard, but I would simply note and reinforce what you, Mr. President, and Board Member Prosser noted, which is many of the things we heard are enhancements to the system which can be developed over time. But I also just would emphasize that in sort of our study of the implementation of these programs throughout our industry, we've tried to learn the lessons from many others. And over the last few years, literally, you have been working to simplify the fare code and the system so that this implementation can go smooth. And it is, at that point, we can certainly begin to consider some, if you will, complicating factors into that system. But I think it's really important to sort of notion that we were trying to keep it simple quite on purpose to sort of make sure that the implementation of that technology goes smooth. I'd also note, just related to the, and going back to one of the slides that Chris showed, is that we have many, many more ways to pay for people. So yes, the retail network is important, and we've been emphasizing that, and we're continuing to grow that, and the efforts to do that won't stop. But I'd also say, when I started, I didn't even anticipate, frankly, that we would have the ability to call on a phone and go through a phone menu to load card. That is, if somebody has access to a bank account. So again, many, many more ways to pay that I think will be greatly advantageous to our community overall. And I would just sort of note on the outreach process, I think you were briefed on the many meetings that we had. The challenge, of course, is that nobody right now uses an electronic fare system, so it's very challenging to sort of begin, first of all, to explain it and then begin to get the feedback that is meaningful feedback on these details. So I do think, again, to the earlier comments, we need to be open to learning as we begin as we continue our outreach and as we begin to roll this program out and begin to learn from that overall. Finally, just related to the bus operators, we have had at many of the sign-ups locations, we have had information provided to the operators, people there to explain the new system, to get feedback on the new system. And we are continuing that, and that is indeed a topic that's coming up in our annual training for operators over the next year. So again, part of it is to get these basic rules of the road aligned, allow us to roll forward with the education process, and then begin to learn from that and begin to see if there are changes or adjustments we need to make over time. So with that, I would simply pause, and again, we can perhaps get more detailed information back to you at the second reading of this ordinance, if that's appropriate.
Other specific questions or comments by the board members on this one? All right, I guess I do have a couple of comments. First off, thank you very much for coming and providing your input, and also congratulations to the staff. I think you've done a lot of really good work on this project. In the way I view this is what we're trying to do is streamline and make more efficient how we, implement our existing fares and what we have in place today. So what I guess I'm saying, and is I look at the things like a family fare or the low-income fare. We've had some discussions about those. To me, those are issues. If you put those in place, then you can easily put those into the fare system. But I think those are issues that frankly need a lot of discussion and dialogue about how we actually may do that. And I've said before that I think that, for example, the low-income fare, maybe we need to spend a little time talking about how to actually get that started, because it's not just, as I pointed out before, Trimet's responsibility to deal with that. I think the community and some of our other state, other local governments and nonprofits and others have a responsibility to help step up and make this, address this issue. So I think that maybe it is time to talk about, again, some further work on low-income fare programs, which probably would be expanded, I suspect, to deal with families and how you deal with all that. But I don't see that's something that we can be, frankly, may not be able to get done by 2017, because I think it is a multi-jurisdictional issue. And I think it's worthy of doing that. I'd like to actually work with folks like Opal and others to actually have something, have a dialogue about how we could have that done. And I applaud the staff for saying, let's continue with the options for having, cash transactions right now, because I think that will also deal with things. But I think, as was pointed out, people are going to quickly migrate to this system after they realize the benefits of it being in place. So I think we need to have a little more dialogue about this next month as we move forward. And if you have some other thoughts and answers on how we ought to do that, I would love to hear what staff has to say on that.
Very good.
All right, with that, that is the last item on our formal agenda for this morning. And I will point out, again, this will be on for second reading at our meeting on February 24th, where we can adopt it based on the process, or if we want to make substantive changes to the ordinance, we would have to again have another hearing, I assume, on the changes, and then it would be delayed. So again, please come back on a February 24th meeting, and I suspect we'll have a more detailed discussion of the issues that we heard today. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to adjourn the business meeting and then go into our, you have a final briefing item for us today on service planning, is that correct?
Yes, and we actually have set up the room next door.
Oh, okay.
For that, so.
I didn't know that, all right?
Relax a little bit, yeah.
Okay.